So the hope here really is to provide you with some tips and thoughts as you transition. Really it's geared towards the fellows as they exit, and so I apologize for some of the residents, but this will be hopefully pertinent for you sooner than later. Um, but really for the fellows as you start to transition into practice, and it's going to be a little bit of a potpourri, some different topics and considerations as you start out in practice, hopefully kind of getting you thinking about this next phase and maybe not too overwhelmed, but at least thinking about all the different things you may want or need to do. So really, this is kind of the top six things to do after fellowship and early in practice. What I'm going to try to do here is just really to provide a systematic approach for ensuring success. So the first kind of the top six is to get organized, and that's something hopefully you guys have already been doing. But really, if you haven't, I certainly would recommend taking some time in between fellowship and practice, or even early on in practice when you're not as busy, organizing, getting prepared, and this will help with your efficiencies and will also improve patient experience moving forward. And so some of this has to do with developing protocols. And this is for various members of your team, included but not limited to MAs, X-ray techs with your protocols for different body parts, injections, post-op follow-up, pre-op orders, and post-op therapy protocols. And these can be very important as it allows your team members to assist you without actually you needing to advise them on how to address the situation. And this will help limit the pages, messages, emails that will become when you graduate a funnel all down to you, and you'll realize how much you've kind of been screened throughout the years for all of these questions. And so having ways for people to help themselves without involving you can be very helpful with this. If everyone, I think I'm dating myself here, but remembers the Ronco infomercial, set it and forget it. That was a rotisserie chicken infomercial, if anyone has actually seen that anymore. But that I love that kind of motto because it's sort of how I like to run this part of my practice, where I've tried to empower everyone else through generation and organization of these protocols to really be able to handle situations without actually involving me, and that's led to really kind of my practice that's been on cruise control. And again, this is really having others help you. The other thing this really helps with is staff turnover. One thing I've realized over the years is that this can be it's an unfortunate reality in healthcare, and that some of these positions, especially the MAs, can turn over not infrequently. And especially if you're at multiple sites, now you may be dealing with three MA turnovers all within a short time period. And if you can imagine trying to get three different people all up to speed all at the same time can be quite taxing on your time. So having these protocols that you can just hand over to them can be very, very helpful with this and diminish the burden of retraining your team. There are resources too for post-op therapy, which can be very helpful. I don't know if you guys have access to different things. This is one of the publications that our therapy actually publishes and sells, but having a resource for post-op therapy protocols, so you don't have to either write them out or memorize them or look them up every time, and you and your therapist, wherever that patient goes, can actually be on the same page with what exactly you want to do. So finding a resource that you can have to then give to therapists, or you can at least work with therapists to be on the same page, can be very important as you work through the recovery of these patients post-operatively. Case cards is a critical portion of getting organized. And so hopefully, in my mind, hopefully you've already started to do this and at least asking the institutions that you're going to for various things that you're going to want. But I would suggest doing this kind of now or early on in practice, and then revisiting in 3 to 6 months. So getting the case cards, if you haven't already, from your trusted mentors and figuring out kind of how you want to adjust those now, but then revisiting that when you get your feet wet and can actually think about how you want to continue to do things yourself. And when you generate this, I would really think about minimizing variability. So trying to keep things simple. So don't, have four different distal radius plates that you're going to try to all master. To get good at one system, keep things simple, and then expand your arsenal and attempting new techniques later. And we'll talk more about that actually later. So part of transitioning to practice is ensuring that you're set up to handle cases that come your way. And so obviously you're at an extremely broad, thorough, excellent fellowship that there aren't going to be many voids. But just by luck and happenstance, there's probably things that you may have seen more or less of, and that you may want to continue to do in practice or expand your horizons and gain extra training. So I really think about filling any gaps, especially when you have time and energy earlier on, to try to get this extra training and exposure, either through industry, societies, international travel and trips, and societies. These can all be very helpful in filling any gaps and expanding your skill set. This also getting set up for practice also involves establishing a team of trusted people with good customer service. So many patient complaints, if you've ever actually seen them, that can negatively influence the growth of your practice may actually stem from your support staff and nothing to actually do with you, but really wait times or other negative experiences. And so paying attention to these. Addressing those shortfalls is important, especially early on. And this may necessitate staffing changes, and that can be very actually challenging in the academic environment. It may be a little bit more streamlined in the when you have full control of your staff, but certainly can be challenging, but maybe necessary. So I would pay attention to that because that could be a huge part of patient experience. Um, and I would encourage you all to direct and establish a network of specialists who you trust for excellent patient care to refer your patients to. So these aren't people referring to you, but these are who you're going to refer your own patients to. So these are partners that you're going to need. So neurologists that can do EMGs, radiologists for guided injections, ultrasound, depending on if you're going to do that yourself or not. Second set of trained eyes if you want to look at an image and bounce it off them. Rheumatologists, spine doctors. These are all people that you're going to overlap a lot with your patients and may need their expertise to help guide your care. And so having this network can help with overall patient experience. And then in turn, hopefully through that relationship, you can become their go-to provider. So when they see someone, your neurologist diagnose someone with carpal tunnel, they will send them to you. Rheumatologist has a patient with bad erosive changes, they'll send them to you for arthroplasty or whatnot. And then establishing rapport with regional specialists, as well as your partners, can allow you to seek assistance for difficult cases. And then also finally having a marketing plan is incredibly important getting set up. This is something I would reach out to your team of wherever you're going to try to see about and coming up with a plan. So what are we going to do to build my practice in X location? What are we going to do? Am I going to do some meet and greets? Am I going to give some lectures? Am I going to open up some clinics and then run down to the ERs to introduce myself. So a lot of those things can be done as you're ramping up, and just developing that plan and executing on that plan can be quite helpful. And I would revisit every 6 months or so in the first few years. Setting up your schedule and reevaluating as time progresses is very important. So usually, now it depends on the practice you join, but a lot of times as you start, call and trauma cases occupy a lot of that early volume. And that those clinic schedules can fill up very quickly with follow-up patients that are needing post-op care or cast changes and whatnot. And so really importantly here is to try to make sure that you have enough slots to see new patients, because this will help build that elective base to then go along with a traumatic base. And otherwise, your follow-up patient volume can actually block out your elective patient growth. The other thing I might consider is these kind of quote unquote add-on slots. These are slots that are held open for call patients or urgent scheduling needs, and having a reputation of being accessible can be important early on in practice. And so trying to create these slots where it's integrated in that you have that slot open for last minute urgent needs can be quite helpful. And then again, just reevaluating this every couple months. And as I said, one of the patient main complaints is the wait times. And so trying to avoid developing that reputation early on. So, not only with how you generate your schedule, so thinking about how and when the flow of patients are coming in, both early on and later on in practice. And one trick I always employ is just to try to show that respect for the patient's time. No matter how long they've been waiting, they will always have been waiting for you. So every time I sit down, I say, apologize for your wait. Thank you, I'm Dr. Smetana. And so even if they've been waiting 30 seconds, they've still been waiting. And so that's one thing that I've found over the years has really helped to kind of mitigate a potential frustrated patient that you may not even be aware about because you might not know that they waited for a while. And studies have shown that in general, if you sit down and kind of do some of these things to try to make patients feel important and that they're cared for, that diminishes the perception of even a few minutes or a visit that only lasts a few minutes. So the next is ramping up and getting busy. So my approach to ramping up early in practice was staged. So early on, it was involved saying yes to anything that really that anyone that offered me a case, they'd always think of me as like as a pathway. Additionally, this involved working with ERs to take call and develop a name regionally, but also stopping by urgent cares and other places to provide my number and an easy way to get patients in the clinic that they would need to get follow-up for. And this is really all to create a flow to you as the path of least resistance. And this is really what you're going for. You're trying to be the easy button for these people and trying to flip onto that mentality of being that for your referral sources can be quite helpful in generating this patient base. And so in the first year, I tried to maximize my clinic time actually to build that elective patient base and ensure that I was not fully reliant on ER volume or call volume because I felt like that's how I would easily very much get burnt out as if I was in the ER or hospital all night doing these add-on cases, late cases. That wasn't, I enjoyed that doing it in to some degree, but I didn't want to only be relying on that. So trying to build that elective patient base. And again, the more patients that are in the non-op pathway, even if you see them, you inject your trigger finger, you give them a splint for their thumb CMC arthrosis, they're going to come back at some point and need something else done. And then also elective cases are generally more predictable. So when you're thinking about kind of work-life balance concerns, trauma cases usually have more unexpected outcomes, and so having more elective cases just allows you to be more predictable with your day. Um, another way of getting busy and kind of early on is getting involved regionally. So get on hospital committees or your practice committees that'll help you build that repertoire, that reputation, and those connections that can help build that practice. And then finally, if work comp is of interest or a possibility, that could also be a nice source of patients and volume. And giving talks can be a great way of trying to get your name out there in the work comp environment. And if you offer CEUs for these, you can it's a little bit easier to get some butts in seats for your talks for that. Your online presence is just becoming exponentially more important. This you guys are probably all aware of this, but more and more patients are seeking online resources for information. And so not only seeking but managing your online feedback should be a focus for you. So when you start out, you're probably not going to have any feedback, and I hate to say it, but we all get negative feedback. And so making sure to try to flood the online environment with positive feedback that you get probably 90% of the day, and really trying to cultivate those positive opinions online is really important. So, and there are services that you can actually hire for this. That's one thing we did that really helped significantly increase our ratings online. The other thing I would really spend time on is online bios and videos. And so these are ways to taking the time to generate this can actually really influence patients. And that's something that I was kind of dumbfounded by. But I still have patients come in and talk about my bio online. And early on, I was just really surprised how they chose to come see me. And they said that they read my bio and they liked what I had written more than kind of my senior, much more seasoned mentors. And so I think that that could be hugely influential for your patient base. And then obviously social media can be important. I think that certainly growing for both younger and aging generations, but I think that that needs to be done with caution and or purpose. And so that's something maybe I would talk to your marketing team about. Realistically, long-term growth is based on kind of two things. So the first is a happy patient. They are probably by far your best referral source. So, that grandma that you did that total shoulder on that tells their daughter to come in for their carpal tunnel, that tells her sister that she did great and comes in for their tennis elbow or whatever. These are all the people that are just going to exponentially expand your patient base, and this will compound over the years. So being sure to deliver that excellent care early on and just develop the systems to deliver that is just very important so you continue to foster those relationships. The other thing is harnessing the reviews, and that's one thing to help build your online presence and give a nice personal touch is trying to get patient testimonials. So someone that had a great experience, especially when you have time, like sit down, ask if they'd be willing to provide a testimonial, maybe connect them with your marketing team. But that would be what my suggestion for both long-term growth, but ways to harness that earlier on. And then the kind of the second or third long-term growth strategy would be to build that network of referring providers. And so these are people that need to rely on you. So they need to be able to get people in reliably and that their patients come back and said they had a good experience. So doing meet and greets, making sure you're providing a good service, lecturing, sometimes that can be helpful, though in general, providers are trying to get home to their families. And so this can be a little challenging. But sometimes if you have an exciting enough topic or incentive, like a regional basketball game or something like that, you can get people to come. And then follow up on continued referrals and thank yous. Our team sends baskets every Christmas to our top referral sources, and then follow up on lost referrals. Anything we could have done differently? Why did I noticed you stopped sending us patients? Any reason we'd like to do better? Um, The other kind of thing you can do long term is developing a niche. Now, this is something that can certainly get you more and more patients, especially within a certain realm. And a need in your community is certainly a great way to kind of find a void and get a patient base, but also this is potentially a great way to discover a niche that you may have also interest you. But all the things I listed here are different niche types that you can consider developing. And I'd start to think about that now, and I w wouldn't really try to necessarily jump into that yet. Certainly, if you're very ambitious, I think you can do all of this stuff all at once, but this would probably be in my 3 to 5 year plan versus my 1 to 3 year plan. And an interest with this niche is probably the most important. So you need to have that internal drive and desire to become the expert in the field. And you want to think about the absolute worst patients and complications because they are going to find you. If you become, the X person, these patients are going to find you. So you need to think about, is this something I'm okay with seeing? Is something is the good outweigh the bad? Do the interesting cases kind of make me happy enough that I'm okay to deal with these either disasters or complications or maybe non-desirable patients. And then finally, do you enjoy reading for this topic? Does it interest you? Because that's probably going to be something you're going to need to continue to do. As you start to say, "Hey, I want to be this X person. I want to take care of the high-level athletes or whatnot," one way to separate yourself early is to become a knowledge expert. And so you may not have the wealth of experience, you may not have the technical mastery, and you haven't, done a lot on the national or international scene yet, but you can become an expert with knowledge. And that's one way of separating yourself, at least from your peers regionally or locally. And so that's one thing I would probably start with. The second is just focusing on technical excellence and proficiency. So, nerve problems became just a really main focus of mine. And so it's something I really enjoy doing, and it's become sort of the niche that I've gravitated towards. And so, I look back on some of the early pictures I took and I'm like, gosh, I can't believe I did the repair that way. And that's how you get better. So trying to focus on ways to get technically more proficient and provide better outcomes. And with good outcomes, others in your region will become impressed and you become the go-to within your organization or even regionally. And then that kind of next level is becoming the expert. So doing research, giving talks, teaching courses, review articles, chapters, books, and these are all ways to kind of develop that next level of expertise and or reputation. And so this was sort of my continuum. So starting with the simple stuff, I just enjoyed doing the simple stuff. I would always say yes to that. And then kind of recognizing internally this was something I was really interested in, really taking on that complex pathology and saying yes. Anyone that wanted one, I made it clear that was an interest of mine. And then two, I would always say yes to those complicated revisions or more complicated cases. And that you really need to, I think, do that to build this niche out and then becoming the go-to kind of either in practice, maybe even regionally. And then kind of further on is developing a dedicated program for this. And that's really where our program came from. I launched this, I think, 6 or so years ago now. And really it was a genesis from all of us sharing similar passions for this certain niche and wanting to provide better care for patients, really recreating what others have done in the country. I think our particular challenge was doing this within a group of surgeons that all are highly skilled and also believe that they have the capacity to still care for these types of things. And so we're trying to thread the needle in this maybe potentially more unique environment, although I don't think other centers or departments are necessarily too different. But to do this, we needed to get other people's buy-in. And so the way we did that is really to say, okay, well, we're not going to take care of acute nerve injuries, ones that everyone else wanted to take care of. We're really going to take care of everything that you don't want to deal with. So plexus, nerve pain, amputees, lower extremities, spinal cord injuries, we will happily take all of that. That's what we want to do. That's what this program is going to be made for. And instead of taking some of their pie, we really were trying to expand the pie. So get patients that may not have had a home to our center for care in this program, and also to potentially be a dumping ground. So and honestly, my partners are our best referral base. Um, because they're the most knowledgeable. They get these patients that walk into their door, this is not necessarily something that they want to take care of, but they recognize that it's one of those things on the left, and so they send it to us. And so it's actually like a perfect way of getting highly screened patients that actually need care by getting other people's buy-ins. The development of the model was purely based on discussion with other centers that have done this in the past and not trying to reinvent the wheel. But this was very helpful in trying to think about all of the options and considerations there about workflow, timing, processes, and getting organizational leaders on board. I've been marketing this for 6+ years now, and it's never ending. But so I could talk about marketing kind of ad nauseum. But we one thing to think about, if you're talking about external marketing to patients, the website and or SEO can be very helpful and or targeted ads. And so this is something we thought a lot about and spent dollars towards, but trying to pick things that you can make the needle move in without spending huge amounts of dollars, I think is important with this. And so especially with this niche, if you're talking about amputee care, the hits for amputee care are pretty low when you Google that. But if you Google shoulder pain, everyone wants shoulder pain patients. They pay well, they get better. And so it's a lot harder to make a move in that space. And so trying to focus on things that would create small wins and move us up, move the needle a little bit more was helpful there. I kind of highlighted the other things that I thought were very helpful, at least for me. So therapy, they're frontline workers and they can be extremely helpful to identify patients, at least for nerve problems. So marketing and doing talks and whatnot to therapists has been very fruitful for at least us. And then similar to what I talked about with my partners, but orthopods can also recognize similar pathology and be a good filter for people that actually need care. This was also kind of the way I built out the lower extremity. We're hand surgeons and people don't think of us for lower extremity problems. And so this is a challenge for us, at least in the nerve world. And so, the orthopods that are now my partners as well, have been very helpful in kind of getting us some really, really interesting lower extremity patients and cases now. And this has really boomed ever since we started integrating more with the other orthopods in the area. So that was a little bit of a large segue, but hopefully that talks about kind of how to get busy over the years. So now kind of the next kind of thing to focus on is to figure out ways to get through challenges. And I'm sure you've all had unexpected struggles in cases, especially if you're operating alone. And so that operating alone is really something I really try to, or how to operate alone is something I really try to focus on and the rotations of fellows with me. But and this is really because this could be a huge challenge. You're going to find unanticipated things that you're not going to think about. You're going to, especially with trauma cases, they can be very unpredictable with how long they take and maybe the things that you might find or face. And so I'd really suggest scheduling extra time to account for these, especially with trauma, which can be a larger percent of your cases early on. And this will help to manage your reputation. And for some in the OR, a fast surgeon is a GERD surgeon. And so trying to mitigate this potential negative reputation early on, you can really come off looking like an absolute whiz if you stick to your scheduled times. Um, I would encourage you to do both a physical and a mental walkthrough. So mental pre-op is going to be when you schedule the case, you think about all the things you might need. Take the time, don't just throw in that scheduling ticket. I would really take the time, think about your plan A, your plan B, your plan C, what equipment you need to do if this happens, then that, and think about all the things you might need for each one of those plans, and backups and additional tools and tricks and that things you want to have in the OR and then do the physical walkthrough. Like I can't tell you how many times I've asked for something and it wasn't there or it was down in the basement. And if I didn't ask them to bring it up, we would have been waiting 30 minutes for someone to go down to the basement to retrieve it to bring it up. So these are all those barriers to being efficient and getting through your case that you can face. And so again, mental and physical walkthrough pre-op can be very important for that. The other thing I really harp on is trying to do one task at a time. I remember early on in I think my something like second case in practice, I was doing what I thought was a challenging distal radius fracture, at least at the time. And I remember I was holding reduction. It was perfect. I had the plate exactly where I want it. And I was like, kind of on my side, holding all the things together, using gravity to help me and trying to get this K-wire in. And I just didn't have enough hands and I didn't know how to use my assistant. And so, what I really found, like looking back at that, is I was trying to do way too much all at the same time, and I was not moving forward or progressing. So, think about, with fractures or care or pinning, like just doing one thing. Get the pin, if you're going to pin this proximal or I think it's a thumb proximal phalanx. You're going to pin that, put the pin in the base of the proximal phalanx. Forget about your reduction. Then once the pin's in the right spot, get your reduction, then advance the pin into the canal, and then fine tune your reduction, and then finalize your pin. So doing one thing at a time that allows you to progress along the case. Same thing with distal radius fracture. Generally get 5 fragments to 4 fragments to 3 to 2 to 1. And this can really help you avoid needing extra hands for complex pathology. Just taking a couple two examples. So I actually used to use finger traps for distal radius fractures, but I found that actually to be counterproductive. But I do a lot with extra visualization. So I actually published on this, but if you, I've really found that anything that's distal, doing the extended FCR approach and mobilizing all the flexor tendons really allows that to fully mobilize and see the volar on the corner. And that was really what the impetus of the study was. And so I do that for pretty much all distal or intra-articular fractures. So one visualization can just keep you happy if you can see what you're wanting to see and work on. And then, thinking about the order operations we just talked about, but then also using your construct as a reduction tool. So using the tools that are available to you will also help minimize steps and needs. So, the plate's usually contoured to the appropriate position, the radius. So using that to your advantage can be helpful to keep moving through a case. For nerve stuff, I found kind of the couple things that was really helpful for me as I was trying to figure out how to, move through a nerve case without actually an assistant or other than a scrub tech. These tables can be very helpful. So the top one's a Tupper, the bottom one's a Strickland, but something that can help hold the hand and retract for you so you don't have to use your assistant for that. The other is trying to use aids to help execute a coaptation. So personally, I've moved towards either using fibrin glue just to hold the two nerve ends in place while I execute a repair, and or using a connector conduit to also help, again, minimize all of the moving parts. I just found it way more technically is easy. And when I looked at my repairs and critically assessed them, I just found that they were much better when I used these tools to help with that. The other is just even cutting a nerve. So thinking about how you're going to use your assistant to do this and having the unskilled assistant kind of grab the nerve and that's going to be tossed in the trash can. So they're not having to also understand how they should grab nerve and not crush it and kind of ruin the potential surgery if they do so. So finally, don't forget your lifelines and these getting through these challenges. So these could be your co-residents, fellows, mentors, partners, could be your communities through societies. And really, on a number of occasions, I've reached out to my mentors for guidance along the years, and even called someone early on in the middle of the case if I really kind of needed some advice. So kind of the last couple things here before maybe moving on to another topic is getting into routine. So this can be, as you get busier, getting into routine is important to not only ensure to stay on the top of clinical duties, but also ensure to prioritize elements that promote mental and physical wellness. So planning and scheduling these activities, in my opinion, is incredibly important. This is actually something I learned from Paige Fox. She gave a lecture and talked about how she kind of balanced and was able to complete all of her academic tasks, but also, stay involved with her family, prioritize her spouse's needs and exercise and whatnot. And sitting down with your partner or spouse and prioritizing everything, putting things on the calendar was the way that she kind of achieved that. And that's something that I fully adopted and I would highly recommend. This helps kind of normal set expectations and understand what your partner or spouse's priorities are and helps with organization. And then as you get established and your practice grows, consider seeking additional ancillary staff. So this is something again that really helps with work-life balance. And I obviously you're past the negotiating phase from a contract standpoint, but I would consider negotiating these early on, and even approaching your partners or chairs to try to see how to integrate these as you move forward. So kind of switching to another topic that I'll try to go through somewhat quickly because I think we're approaching the 30 minutes, but I wanted to talk too about just when to stick to what you know and when to try something new, because this is something that even the last 5 years, I think it's just crazy how many new things are out there, new techniques, new considerations. I think it's very important to kind of think about this as you and do it a little bit more purposefully as you start to get into practice. And so if no one's ever heard Bob Carroll's quote, I think it's awesome, but good, better, best, never let them rest until your good is better and your better best. So really this is about lifelong learning, and this is integrated into many of our institutions and overarching societies. And so when we see new techniques, we're innately intrigued as to if this novel approach can optimize our patients' care and improve outcomes. And so the question I kind of hope to answer here is to provide insights on when to adopt a new technology or techniques to help improving the quality of delivery care for patients. And so, the Hippocratic Oath early on, it should, in my opinion, be the main focus. And first is really doing no harm. And the way I kind of interpret this early on is doing what you're trained to do and doing it well. And so early on, you're going to be faced with the adversity of public scrutiny due to perceived and real inexperience, and you're going to think you may need to be the most up to date versus being stuck in your own ways in order to, live up to these expectations or considerations of the public. And you might feel like you need to provide the patients with latest and greatest, but if no one's ever kind of seen this curve, I would kind of maybe take a look at it. I think it's very helpful to just look through it in a little bit detail once, to think about how you think about yourself early on in practice and how you think about maybe when to plug in new things. And so really this is, early on, this whole concept is based on the cognitive bias, whereas people with low ability overestimate their true capabilities. And so this is the disconnect early between our own self-assessment and our objective performance. And so we really all start early on at this peak of Mount Stupid, which I think is a totally appropriate name for where we are kind of early on in practice. And this is really scary, honestly. We don't know what we don't know. We're well trained, we have excellent skills and knowledge, but we don't know all the pitfalls that we might face. We're lacking the ability to anticipate needs and bail ourselves out, and we lack refined judgment and intuition. And so the best thing, in my opinion, to do in this phase is to minimize variability. You kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but so stick to one way of doing things and minimize heterogeneity until you gain mastery of that technique. And then spend time at the end of training and early on in practice to decide exactly how you want to do it so that you can then commit to that, stick to it, and then once you master that, move on to something else. So this is the diffusion of innovation theory, and I think we've all heard of this. But with this, there's as a product becomes more and more utilized, or a technique becomes more and more widespread, there's the different phases of people who adopt things. So there's the innovators who kind of develop things, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and then the laggards. And these are all influenced, kind of the way that people adopt things are influenced by the innovation is this groundbreaking and clearly something that you should adopt by the people that then adopt it and then may hold some social capital influence over you. Communication channels, publications, time, obviously, as time goes on, there may be more and more out there, and that might help sway you into adopting a new thing. And then social systems, friends, colleagues that might tell you, hey, I did this, it's pretty cool, check it out. And obviously, social media can be play a role in this as well. And so, my opinion early on in practice, kind of years 1 to 3, is this is not really the opportune time to start performing a novel procedure. And the complications are unknown, the technical considerations are also unknown. And this is, again, we don't really know how to work ourselves out of difficult scenarios with the already established techniques, let alone a new technique that really we don't really know what works and what doesn't. And so my opinion is that you should probably be in the late majority early on in practice with any sort of new technique. Now, there's like all things in medicine, there's exceptions or the asterisk. So obviously, if there's new clear evidence that supports a novel approach over prior standards of care, this is, clearly something that you shouldn't be doing anymore and should move to the next technique. Or if this is really a quote unquote new procedure, but it's only new either due to personal experience, yet the procedure itself is well established and falls within your skill set, and that potentially could apply to touch making its way in the US. So as time goes on, years 3 to 5, so the next phase of your career, my opinion is you now should maybe challenge dogma. So what would you do here? So one example here is the management of thumb CMC arthritis. And so one thing I kind of realized early on is that really dogma is pervasive. And so I was starting to think about, I think this really actually came about when I was prepping for boards and I was trying to look at, cutoffs for thumb MP joint management and CMC arthritis and found the article that described why we use 30 degrees, and that cutoff was chosen completely arbitrarily. Now, there's been studies that kind of assessed this since then, but really, the impetus of using 30 degrees is because Eaton and Floyd said that in 1988. And so, I'd start to, truly investigate this and think about if these types of things are worth continuing on. In nerve surgery, this kind of switched from doing a strong end-to-end repair, flexing all the joints, to a complete tension-free repair with minimal suture material, and now probably somewhere in between, and with some tension maybe being best over grafting. And so, the pendulum keeps swinging. There are dogmas out there, and not a whole lot of proof for certain things. And so, I think this is the phase where you should kind of think about why am I doing things? Why do I order EMGs on all carpal tunnels? Do you use autograft and suture for all nerve repairs? CMC arthroplasty? Do they require immobilization? I mean, think about whatever it may be in your practice that you're just kind of doing, but may not know all of the evidence for. And if you're saying, okay, well, I did this because Dr. Su, Dr. Wagner, Dr. Zelensky, all my mentors kind of taught me to do it this way. But when I look in the literature, fine, I find some great evidence. Yeah, I'll continue to do that. But if I don't, then maybe that's time to try something new there, or develop a study to assess optimal technique or approach. So how do you prove quality in years 3 to 5? I think that's really kind of a challenging dogma. So supporting and refuting current standards, raising new questions, highlighting future research, and this may be the time to ditch that tried and true technique. And finally, for kind of what I call the golden years, so 5 to 10 plus, I think here is where you evaluate, innovate, and experiment. And I was told by Bill Kleiman early on in my practice when I think I had just finished taking boards and I had just become partner and I was like, oh my gosh, like I finally made it. I'm excited. I feel like I'm in a groove. My practice is like busy and I'm not grinding all the time. And then what he told me in that moment to completely deflate me was just wait until you're 5, then you'll be happy. And to be honest, I think he was actually completely right. Yeah, a year 5 to 10 plus, it's been a lot of fun. I feel like I'm not stressing about a lot of things or thinking about too much, and so it's been a lot of fun. And I think he was right about that. And this is really because you're hitting your stride, you're established, and that knowledge and skill matches your judgment and intuition. And so this is in my opinion the important opportune time to try something new. So you know the knowledge of deficiencies in care, you're aware of the limitations of current standards, and you're able to anticipate pitfalls of a new approach and technology and adapt. And I think that's why you're so much more adept at kind of integrating something new at this phase. And so here, the caveats here are to do so with rigorous review, kind of the sniff tests, and use your fundamentals and logic to kind of assess before you adopt and ensure safety and maintain standards. And one thing that may become more influential is either industry or peer pressure or even sometimes stagnation or boredom. So these are things to really avoid being influencing factors on any decision. And then with this, sometimes the new latest and greatest is actually a repeat of something that failed in the past, just in repackaged in a different way. So knowing the history, knowing how things fail, and using that knowledge to then be able to judge how something may or may not do, to not repeat prior mistakes can be very important. So kind of in summary, when to try something new, I think Bob Quayle's quote is essential here. You always want to try to get better, but early on, probably the focus needs to be by not doing harm and sticking to what you know, then trying to challenge some things that may not have great backing in your practice, and then as time goes on, really trying to innovate and experiment without forgetting where we came from. So hopefully this talk kind of provides some pathways for success on a blueprint to kind of use moving forward. And happy to kind of talk through anything or answer any questions here.
Brandon, that was awesome. Really, really nicely done. Um, Open it up. Any of the trainees on the call, fellows or residents, have any questions?
Yeah, thanks for a great talk. That was very useful. I'm joining a group that has 8 hand surgeons currently. So your part where you talked about the protocols, it obviously it may be hard to shake something up, especially when the PAs and everyone that sees the post-ops already sort of has an established thing. Is that sort of what you default to early on? Is, if everyone's doing the same thing, it's hard for you to stand out and be different and make things more, I guess, complicated. Until you're a little bit more established, or do you try to do something a little bit different?
Yeah, I mean, I think depends a little bit on the group and the dynamics, but I think there's no harm trying to make things the way you want to make them. Obviously, you want to, like anything, pick your battles and try to figure out, what you want to push on and what you don't. I mean, depending on your situation, there may be a lot of things you'd want to change, or maybe things that is just like it's perfect as you come in. So, I think, my strategy there would probably be to first get any protocols or advice from any of my partners, see if they had anything written down or kind of established with certain pathways, and then figuring out if that kind of matches up with the way you would want to do it. And depending on if that's kind of the only thing you're wanting to change, or if that's part of a larger spectrum of things that you'd want to do differently than the way they do it, picking and choosing your battles as you integrate in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smetana. That was fantastic. Just two quick questions. Can you talk? You mentioned that one of your patients really liked your biography. And then you also talked about how social media can be useful, but you need to be careful with it. And I think a lot of people, when they talk about social media, they mention you got to be careful with it. But do you want two questions? What do you think are the most important things that you put on your biography for your website or wherever you put it? And then two, if you're going to use social media, what would be, how would you use it, and any pearls on that?
Yeah, I think for the first question, I think that some of it has to do with where I'm practicing. And so some of my background is on the East Coast and has some named universities that may go along with it. So I think that goes in my favor in my area. The other is just kind of the kind of academic things that I'm very excited about. I really tried to put on there. So I think that looking at some of my partners' bios, I think helped to separate me from them. I think some patients also just enjoy the personal side of things. So trying to ensure that you have some elements of your personality, things that you enjoy doing, your family, your likes, your passions, I think can also help patients kind of connect with you. So those would be sort of the elements I would think about. And then I think you were asking about kind of social media. So I kind of have a love-hate relationship with social media. I think there's a lot of good that it can do, but I think there's a lot of risk it also opens you up to. And so I am a little bit more adverse to just throwing everything on there. I think it's a, personally, I think of social media more from the fellowship standpoint and marketing the fellowship than I do my own practice. But I don't know. I think that, when you're trying to market to patients, I think geocaching or sorry, geo tracking, and trying to get certain patients in certain locations to come to you for certain problems is probably the way that I would focus on that personally. But certainly having a large following can be a way to do that. I think in my mind that probably works best for plastic surgeons doing cosmetic things, and less maybe for hand surgeons trying to market themselves to hand surgery or patients that desire hand surgery. I think the one exception to that may be with the advent of touch. I think some people that have gotten a lot of volume and success early on have had a decent social media, online and kind of regional news presence to market their institutions doing them.
Awesome. Thank you.
Brandon, I have to piggyback on that. So with all the evolving technology coming out with AI, with avatars, with a bunch of other stuff that people are using and evolving, what is something that you think is gonna have a big impact on us, whether early on in practice, growing in practice, or on people that are a little bit more seasoned like you and I, maybe old men like you and I, that what do you think, is there something that you're excited about or something that you see that's gonna have a big difference?
From a marketing or practice development standpoint.
Yeah, marketing, practice development, making your or building your practice, or getting referrals, or not necessarily the efficiency part of running practice, but the kind of, yeah, getting busy, building practice, building a referral network, etc.
I wish I had some excellent thoughts on the AI side of things. Actually, I don't know, you may know more than I do on that front, but I don't know of any newer, like in the last year or two, technology that would really impact that. At least that's coming to the forefront of anything I could think about. But I do think, certainly the automated systems for generating online reviews, I think, have been instrumental. And so that may be something that becomes more automated, maybe not AI, but certainly automated. Um, at least Google stopped allowing you to select. So there used to be a service that would collect a review. If it was positive, you would then promote them to go to X, Y, or Z to then put a review online. But if it was negative, you wouldn't do that. Google basically nixed that. And so I'm maybe there's some value in AI kind of coming in there before to judge the quality of the experience before you get that online review ask sent out. But I think those automated systems can be very helpful because you're going to have countless of people that have positive experiences, and trying to harness those can be very helpful because you will get those patients go online and have negative experiences, and they could be much more vocal than your happy patients, which way outnumber your unhappy. Um, and then there's going to be something else I'm going to say. Um, I mean, I certainly think AI could be helpful with throughput. And so certainly if you could maybe feel that you could see more patients in a day, and that could allow you to be more accessible. And so I do think that, we have, I don't know if you guys, I'm sure you guys do, but we use AI services for documentation and scribing. And so it just has really streamlined things, streamlined billing, streamlined a lot of different things. So I'm spending less time in the EMR, documenting, clicking buttons, that sort of thing. And so it could expand our capacity to see patients, which could help with throughput and also help with patient experience being more on time, and also being available and accessible. So I think maybe those two things is what I think about.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. That's awesome.
Brandon, I think another important thing when you're first starting a practice is complications. Like, how did you deal with complications? Like, I perseverate, lose sleep, then I talk Wagner's ear off until he goes crazy, and then it makes me feel better. And that's how I deal with my complications. But how did you, when you started your practice, deal with complications?
I think that's kind of a multifaceted response. So there's kind of the medical things that you need to do, meaning how do you treat the complication appropriately? So first is one, recognizing it, not banging your head in the sand, admitting it, talking to the patient about it. So that's kind of step one. Step two is figuring out what the best thing to do is. So, if you know it, then execute it. If you don't, phone a friend, like Nina said. Um, and then kind of actually care for the patient. Then, there's the two other aspects of that. One is the internal side, and kind of dealing with it mentally, dealing with it kind of spiritually. Like, one thing in this line of work is you will hurt somebody. And I think accepting that going into practice, I think is just important, because there's going to be a time that you are going to do something that is going to have a negative outcome and outlook on someone's life. And so I think that is the nature of being a surgeon. And so it happens to everybody. So whenever it happens to you, because it will happen at some point, I think accepting that, and that I think helped me think about my complications and not beat myself up too much. Uh, the kind of the third thing is with the patient. So, how do you talk to the patient about it? How do you handle that situation? There's a number of considerations there. One is just good customer service. The other is, trying to avoid a medical legal outcome from that complication. But, the thing that always gets said, and certainly I've had experience with, is, the thing that you want to do, especially for that internal struggle that comes with a complication, is to bury your head in the sand, send the patient away, never see them, because it hurts. Every time you see that patient, you feel like crap. You feel like I'm a crappy surgeon. I did something that wasn't good. I'm here in this to help people, but I ended up, causing harm. And so, the tendency is to want to send that patient away, but you want to do the exact opposite. So bring them closer, see them more frequently, talk to them often. Sometimes even just talking them in stages, either on the phone or in person. Or touching base with them more frequently, because patients, especially that are dealing with, sometimes these are losses. If it's a nerve complication, which tend to be the most litigious or life altering, it's a form of a loss where they lose feeling, they lose motor function, they lose the ability to be pain free. And so, they might go through all those stages of loss. And so you might need to touch base with them throughout those phases to actually truly reach them and help them through that process. And I think just, showing that humanistic side, showing that you care, showing that you're actively trying to help them and get better, and providing that service and being accessible, I think are all of the ways to try to mitigate that medical legal potential negative consequence. But I don't know, hopefully that helps answer that question.
No, I think that's very instructive. Yeah, for sure. It's like if you have a problem or a patient's being difficult, it's like the tendency, you have to resist the tendency to send them away or like not want to deal with it. You almost have to double down on like listening to them or spending a bit more time or something. I would agree with you on that for sure. Any of the fellows have any questions? Otherwise, we can let Brandon enjoy his evening. All right.
All
Well,
right, thanks all.
Brandon,
Awesome, Brandon.
thanks so much. Take care.
Enjoy the
Awesome, Brandon.
Yeah.
Enjoy the holiday, Brandon. Look forward to seeing you this in a month or two.
Yep, sounds good. All right.
Bye.
Congratulations, all the fellows on graduating.
Well, I don't know if they have yet. We'll see. We have a month, you know.
Nina still has to graduate him.
We have a month, Brandon. We don't know yet. It's up in the air.
All right, good night, everyone.